No. Good morning. Boy, as you know, I'm pretty sure you did know, we've been following this pandemic procurement and emergency purchasing that's been going on. Sabrina Salas-Mantanani, a great story last night, and sifting through an avalanche of documents that we've received by way of Freedom of Information Act request. And, one of the things that you pointed out in that story that you did yesterday, Bree, was that the administration has put out these memorandums and these contracts and these invoices, and basically, like you said, told Ed Byrne, pay the stuff, right? But I thought it was really interesting in your story how you had brought up that none of this stuff was signed.
Right.
I mean, some of it had some signatures, and then
some were just invoices with no contract.
Right.
But yeah, the contracts, especially for the hotel isolation quarantine facilities, they didn't have signatures on them from like Charles Esteves,
right.
I think Marie Kenga, the certifying officer.
Correct.
It didn't have signature from the Attorney General. It didn't have a signature from BBMR,
right.
and it didn't have a signature from the governor.
Right.
So
in looking at these emails that we FOIA'd, there was one particularly for the food services that there was a chain with the governor's legal counsel to the civil defense administrator, Charles Esteves, where basically Hai Hyun was like, hey, we got all these meals. There's meals going here, meals going there, here a meal, there a meal, everywhere a meal, but only for the cabinet, catering of the cabinet's eating good. Yeah, basically Hyun was like, hey, deal with this to pay the man. And Charles Esteves' response to the vendor was, well, show me the contract, to show me the invoices. And so if in tracking the timeline of, and I'm just using the food as an example, because I think the same circumstances apply to all of these memorandums and invoices and contracts that Ed Byrne is being told to pay yesterday. They took it outside of that process where it required that civil defense and homeland security involvement, and put it now in this other lane where they can fast track it and not have to worry about who doesn't want to sign whatever.
Right. And I did message the Attorney General's office, Carlina Charfras, to get a comment on whether or not the AG's signature is required on these documents. And, the response, I couldn't get a yes or no. One of the responses was that this is not the normal course of action for contracts, but the Gov cited the law, which allows her to do what she did under these out of ordinary circumstances. So, of course, I said, well, is that a no? Then the response was the law says the governor can suspend certain provisions. And again, so I responded, is the signature now not required? Are you not able to provide a yes or no response? The response that I got, the question of what the governor believed her authority is should be directed to her. We're not prepared to give a legal opinion on the extent of the governor's authority when there is a public health emergency. My response, that's not what I asked. I asked if the AG is required to sign these contracts. The response I received, you are asking me a question that requires a legal opinion. The Gov cited her authority, and I've said that the law says the governor can suspend certain provisions. And I sent her a copy of the email with one of the AG's giving guidance, I guess you could say, to
I don't know. I just feel like I wasn't really clear on what the gist of that answer was. It kind of seems like, oh no, the governor said she has the authority, the administration's backing her, that's right. That.
The AG did not sign off on them. The governor cited her legal authority to execute those contracts. Okay. And then, of course, it just kept on going. Right. Yes or no, yes or no.
Yeah, so I was just thinking in my mind, if you're an independent elected AG and, maybe an administration says, hey, we can do this, then you might want to be like, well, let me just check if you can do that.
No, yeah, you're right. I did ask, will the AG
not
conduct
just like,
a review?
Oh, get out of the way, go ahead, go for it.
Will the AG conduct a review of the entire process and vet it for legality, compliance, and quality control as an independent elected attorney general.
Can you repeat that question that we sent again? That's a good one.
Will the AG conduct a review of the entire process and vet it for legality, compliance, and quality control as an independent elected attorney general?
And what was the response you got?
Actually, I got a call at 8:37 p.m. last night.
Okay, so maybe that's something they have to tell you over the phone. That's not a texting thing.
Yeah, I'd like my response in writing, please.
Yeah. And so we wanted to bring, he is the Office of Civil Defense Administrator, Charles Esteves, onto the show and kind of get his take on things. And, Charles, first of all, we really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
Hey, half a day.
All right. I just want to know why didn't you sign any of these agreements?
Well, the process wasn't done through GSA, so if it wasn't done through GSA, then, we can't certify documents without a GSA contract, purchase order. And so, if it was done during the height of the event, when we thought we're going to get thousands of cases and there's a peak, I'm pretty sure that certain people have to do what they need to do. But just on our end, with the emergency funds that we're given and charged with, if I'm given something and there's nothing from GSA, then we can't act upon it. Right. So when I was given the invoices from Capital Kitchen, and we tried to see if there was still the continued need for feeding. And so when Capital Kitchens called me up and said, how do we basically get a contract? And so I said, okay, let me see your last contract, go ahead and shoot me your invoices so we know, how much you're talking about. And when the owner told me that he didn't have an existing contract, I said, oh, okay, as of right now, please stop feeding. Because we can't, I can't tell him to keep feeding, because then we start incurring costs that, I'm just not prepared to pay.
Well, Charles, it kind of sounds like, and I don't know if this is an oversimplification, it kind of sounds like the governor's legal counsel, acting under the authority of the administration, that he was out here arranging all this stuff and then shooting it over to you, expecting you to kind of just rubber stamp it.
Well, so I can tell you that they've never asked me to do anything illegal.
Right.
Okay. So and if you think about it, you have to look at the intent, right? So if I were to look at this from just taking my opinion out and just try to give my something without bias, is were they acting in good faith, or were they acting during the from what they believe to be for the best interest of the people? And it's kind of hard to tell, right? You have to kind of look at everything they did and see, was the threat really there? And so this kind of reminds me of this Pearl Harbor story, but I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with the story of George Allen.
You got the floor, Charles.
Yeah. So during Pearl Harbor, right there, the entire base, the island of Oahu's under attack. The base is under attack, and they're trying to get into the armory. And so all these soldiers are trying to get into the armory, and then what they found out is that the guy in the armory who wasn't out there, and the threat for this person wasn't realized, and they're trying to get weapons to fight back, and this person said, I can't do it without the authorization of the commanding officer. So they pretty much bum rushed the armory and took the keys and opened up and got weapons. So if you think about it like that, if people realize that there is a threat, they will do what they need to do to get the job done. But does it make it right? I don't know.
Well,
there's still a process though that we're supposed to follow.
I would think that if you should use your soldiers, right? You are in the war. You are on the front line when it comes to emergencies, not the governor's legal counsel. You know the rules. You know the procedures. You have been in the previous administration. You were Civil Defense or Guam Homeland Security Administrator?
Still Civil Defense Administrator.
Okay, so you know what you're doing, right?
Correct.
So why weren't you the one handling this?
That's a good question. But for every single other,
didn't you say at some point, like, yo, step back, hide,
stay in your lane?
This is what I'm supposed to be doing. We got a pandemic response plan. We should probably follow it.
Well, I mean, it took, well, so the Guam Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan was enacted as soon as the governor declared a state of emergency. And so, I have hundreds of purchase orders that I've shared, hundreds of invoices that I've shared. And so you can see that emergency procurement was happening. I mean, it was ongoing for other things that we've needed. But for some reason, for the hotels and the feeding, I don't know why it didn't happen the way it was supposed to happen. But I can tell you now that, it's, we're when I say we, when we talk about civil defense, we're working with GSA to get out contracts and purchase orders for quarantine facilities, isolation facilities, and any other services. So it's right now, it's whatever the process was, it's being recited.
So, Charles, just unpack this for myself mentally. And to use a metaphor, they're driving this car along this road, then they bring it to you, and you're like, oh, no, sorry, you got a U-turn. Thou shalt not pass!
Thou shalt not pay.
Right, and so then it looks like they took it out of that process where Charles Esteves is not going to sign it, and, we don't know now how that affects any federal reimbursement, and so now they moved it over to this, we're going to use the Health Powers Emergency Act, and we're going to get these people paid that way. So I guess my question is, involving you in the process and, Homeland Security and the Homeland Security Advisor from the beginning, following all the steps, jumping through the hoops, this is all done to ensure that we can be reimbursed and accountable to the federal government, correct?
Yeah, correct.
And so by moving it...
The FEMA reimbursement process, I mean, it's document heavy, right? So, they want to make sure that no conflicts of interest existed prior to. They want to ensure that written policies and procedures were in place prior to the disaster. So it's not a matter of just giving, what we have and explaining what we did. It's a process, and we've been through it many times. We still have open disasters for how long? We have open disasters for Dolphin, Mankut, and Wutip.
Right. And so now that we've moved it out of a place where Charles Esteves signs off on it, where, the feds got eyes on it, we've moved it into this Health Powers emergency lane. Does that mean that the people of Guam are just basically going to bite the bullet and eat the cost of all these services? Or is there... I'm not sure. So it really depends on what FEMA will accept in terms of paperwork and documentation. If a document's not signed or not executed, I mean, is it a legal document? I don't know. It really depends on when we do the exploratory calls, and we work with the FEMA recovery division to determine what's eligible and what's not. Right, and so these contracts, memorandums, invoices that the governor has wrote the memorandums for and sent them over to Ed Byrne, saying pay these. Is there going to be any reconciliation after they're paid, where they bring in, Homeland Security, they bring in Tim Uggan, and they're like, hey guys, can you make this right? Or is it just a done deal? Are you never going to sign any of this stuff, or is there a way to rectify it so that it's proper in your eyes?
Well, I'm not going to sign anything unless I get concurrence from GSA, right? So if GSA is, if they're not going to agree, then it makes sense that we wouldn't be able to certify the funds. I don't know if that makes any sense.
GSA is what, Claudia Faji?
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. So in your understanding of the process, would GSA be able to go back and recreate this procurement record or whatever they got to do, and then to send it over to you in a form that's satisfactory, that you would then put your name on it?
Honestly, I don't know. I mean, because we're developing new contracts and new purchase orders for quarantine facilities and isolation facilities, I don't know if anyone's going to revisit the stuff prior to.
Okay.
Wow. So we're potentially looking at, we're just going to eat the cost of all this stuff.
I mean, if that's what needs to happen, then that's what's going to happen.
Wow, that sounds like an expensive. I don't know, what do you call it? Inexperience, a mistake, or is it a power grab? How do you classify this, Charles?
I just, like I said, I just go back to that little story of what happened with George Allen and Peter Allen. At Pearl Harbor, and just trying to do what people felt was best for the people at the time.
Right. Well, I don't, this isn't story time on this show right now. But I wanted to go back to. Go ahead.
So my mom once told me something, right? She told me that when you try to pretty things up with flowers, eventually the flowers die, and it just creates a bigger mess.
Mm-hmm.
My grandma used to say, "Don't put a lot of perfume if you didn't shower." It's kind of the same thing, right?
Yeah. So the thing is, it's no matter how many ways you packaged it, what happened happened.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm all about moving forward and
right.
trying
But man, Charles, that's a bitter pill to swallow to know that I'm not even sure we can recreate a record after things have been signed. So I wonder how Adeloop's going to face this, because it seems like somebody screwed up, didn't follow the process, and now we're just going to have to use our money. Or I'm wondering, is there a way that they can get it under the CARES Act?
That may be a possibility. I haven't read too much into the CARES Act. I'm not sure the exact breakdown. I saw that budget sheet that went down, but I could tell you that just from working with Leftover, the past couple of years, that he is a very fiscally conservative person. And when I say fiscally conservative, he didn't agree to
the decontamination, the cleaning.
Well, decontamination, feeding from the get-go, only because it's. And he asked, are we feeding because there's a need, or are we feeding, because it's a culture to feed, right, during these emergencies? And he was right. It's not a typhoon, and people can reasonably go out and get food. Maybe at the time when all the businesses were closed, people may have had trouble getting food or getting lunch. And food is reimbursable. It's reimbursable, but it really depends on the situation.
Right, but these contracts also said that the hotels shall provide labor, and personnel, and yet we had a cabinet quarantine hotel, Pacific Star, with our several directors.
Yeah. Correct. Yeah. Correct. And from what I'm tracking, the Capital Kitchens contract was for feeding of staff and security personnel.
Right.
But if that did go through Lester's desk, I just don't think he would have approved it, because, like I said, he's very, very fiscally conservative, and he's a prudent person, and he would have said what's wrong with making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich before you go on shift. Mm-hmm. I'm just speaking.
Here's my lunch bag. Hey.
Yeah, and he's absolutely right. During a storm, it's different, because when we're in a condition of readiness too, and we're trying to tell people to stay off the streets, and then you have people trying to go get food, and there's potentially debris and other hazards on the road. That's a different story. But there's still places open. There's still places selling food. That was one of the areas that wasn't under or required to be closed, right? A central business service.
That's a crazy one, Charles. 80,000 to feed directors, deputy directors, and security at these quarantine and hotels and isolation facilities.
And Adeloop, maybe not Adeloop?
Yeah, we don't know about Adeloop. What do you know about that? So we had asked Carlo, because if we look at the initial email that Hai Hun sent to you, it said there were 20 meals provided to Office of the Governor, but then the policy director, Carlo Branch, had said, oh no, they minus that out, and then we've been paying with private funds. But I didn't get any eyes on anything in black and white that said that. So did you have any insight into that in reading through documents that were sent your way?
Well, I think so. I haven't seen anything, but you would think that meals would have been signed out for. They know exactly what meal is going to what person. So for example, right, there were guardsmen at the Days Inn, right? So they're on subsistence allowance, so they shouldn't have been included in any of the accounts. In any of the feeding accounts, right? When they say they need 20 boxes here or 40 plates here, so it's difficult unless you have that other document that shows who is actually being fed to tell who is fed.
Well, man, we had Mayor Rivera on the other day, and she said that they get there's like all these extra meals at these facilities, and they'll call me up, and I'll go pick them up, and I'll have like 20, 30 meals that we're paying for that people are just not eating, and then she just gives them out to the homeless. So I mean, I don't want to say fraud, waste, and abuse, but it definitely seems like waste.
Waste, and
I thought there was supposed to be a hotline at AdLoop that you call fraud, waste, and abuse.
I mean, yeah. Normally, that's I would think that's like the well, in the Army we call them Inspector General, but you know
Right.
Can I just get clarification on what you said a little bit earlier? You said that there were purchases that were made in accordance with proper protocols that civil defense did handle.
Yeah.
Okay. What were those purchases?
So first of all, it's easier just to explain the process of how resource management works during an emergency. So we have, the Emergency Operations Center. We have all these response activity coordinators inside. And when we need a resource, what we do is we ask first within the government of Guam or our other partners, the volunteer organizations active in disasters, and we ask them, say, hey, do you have this specific resource? We need a truck to transport people, or a van, or a bus, whatever the case may be. And so DPW or GDOE, they'll come back and say, yep, we have X number of buses, we have X number of vans, GRTA. And from there, we use that to fill the capability and the need. So if they come back and they say we don't have number of buses, vans, whatever for, because they're under maintenance or they broke down, whatever the case may be, or exceeds our capability or capacity, then we go to emergency procurement. And from there, we start to contract out for vehicles if need be, short-term leases, long-term leases. And if we don't have the capability on the island, that's when we reach out to our federal partners and say, hey, we need transportation capability. And however they task that out, whether they task it out to DOD with their logistical assets for transportation, or they bring in, transportation assets. So that, that's the process. So some of the stuff that we've procured using the emergency procurement is, of course, PPE, right? So we've procured quite a bit of PPE. We haven't procured any of the serological test kits.
Right.
We've also procured just regular construction materials.
Yeah.
Construction materials for, say, the Steamboat Fire Station. They're building out a decontamination kind of add-on to the fire station. And what that's going to allow them to do is decrease the amount of PPE that they currently use, because they just go into to that decon station. They do what they need to do, and then they come out clean, I guess, on the other side.
Man, Charles, I had sent a FOIA your way, and I got the response, and man, it was like night and day looking at how you guys over there are handling your emergency procurement or purchases or whatever you want to call it. I mean, there was like documentation from the beginning, documentation in the middle. They had Claudia Faggi. There was a GSA letterhead on GSA. All the documents and all the ducks were in a row. The I's were dotted, the T's were crossed, and then comparing that with reading the governor's legal counsel's emails and seeing that the way he was handling things, I mean, like I said, it was just night and day. So, Bree, and I got all those docs and what Charles is talking about, all that stuff. I mean, there's just supporting documentation for everything.
Yeah, and you saw it was like probably
it was like 1,000 some pages.
It was, right? I mean, it was 70 different purchase orders, and
right.
Those are 3 to 4 pages long. We have pages of invoices. We had the request to increase purchase orders if we didn't have enough money. Right. In these open purchase orders. You saw 3 quotes. And that's the process. It's a lot of it's lessons learned too. And I say lessons learned because I'm pretty sure that in the history of this agency that something similar was done in the height of the emergency, and at the end when the vendor was asking to be paid, it was just a difficult situation.
Right.
Right?
Okay, but Charles, so you know the process. You guys procured the PPEs, construction materials. So when all of this stuff was happening with the procurement of these quarantine isolation facilities, didn't anybody with experience raise the red flag and say this is not right?
Well, I mean, I wasn't involved until later on. If you look at the emails, and I have a copy of the emails from GHRA, I wasn't involved in that initial discussion or
no, but when it was brought to your attention,
I mean, you kind of, that's when you threw water on the fire. You were basically like, oh, show me the paperwork. And then the whole thing just died, and they took it over to the Emergency Health Superpowers venue.
Yeah, so, like an example with the capital petitions, right, when it was sent over, we there's nothing we could have really nothing we could have done with it because, there's no purchase order to make the payment off of.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of these quarantine isolation facilities, they are getting ready to expire if they have not expired already. With the anticipation that there may be another surge, we're still in peak core 2. One would think that there may still be a need to have these quarantine isolation facilities in place. And if that is the case, as I understand, there's emergency purchases that might need to be made to keep them in place.
I mean, you basically said a few minutes ago, Charles, that you guys are going to start procuring. Is this new hotels for quarantine or what?
So we don't get to choose a hotel. I don't know. I mean, when I say new hotels, new procurement record, right, for these hotels. So
procurement record.
A procurement record for these hotels. So I don't know if it's going to be the same hotels. Really, we leave that decision up to GSA to award. So it may very well be the same hotels. It may be different hotels. But when we send our request through GSA, we're asking for capability, right? So we say we need X number of rooms for quarantine, and they say, okay, we are going to look at what's available through hotels, housing units, however they're going to get us these 200 some rooms.
So that's what we're looking at, is we're trying to secure 200 rooms for a quarantine isolation facility.
So given the latest, the numbers that we've had, like the last number I received is we're occupying 183 rooms for quarantine. So, we want to make sure we have at least 200 and 250 rooms available, especially once they start opening up flights and we continue quarantine operations, then we're going to need to be able to house these people. And I'm pretty sure, public health, they're going to take a look at their criteria for who needs to be quarantined and how long they need to be quarantined. But as of right now, it's 14 days mandatory quarantine for all arrivals into Guam.
So, Charles, again, just to go back, what it sounds like is we're starting all over and doing it the right way now.
Correct.
So because those contracts, they had that provision that you could extend it, I believe, for 1 month, right, for 30 days or something like that. So are you saying that we're not going to be extending any of those unsigned contracts?
No, we're not. We're working through GSA for contracts for quarantine and isolation facilities, and so the entire process is handled through GSA.
So this sounds like a redo.
Or just starting fresh, right?
But I want to ask, because just because you didn't do something, you still tried to do something. So I don't know how I would categorize it, but it kind of seems like they were trying to go around things and then get it over to you and let you put your signature on it, and then we're good to go. But then when that didn't happen, they're like, oh, no, we're going to go over here. So I'm just wondering, it kind of seems like there was a knowing attempt to get around known procedures. And so I wonder, again, I'm not a lawyer. But
neither am I.
I know, but it just seems like just because you didn't do something and get away with it, you still attempted it, and it stopped when you were just like, I'm not signing it. That's how I see it. Is that a reasonable interpretation of events?
Yeah, like I said, they've never asked me to do anything illegal. They've never tried to force me to sign any documents. And I've just given my I don't know if interpretation is the right word, but I've given my interpretation and advice of how I understand the process. And so I can tell you that right now we're working to procure these quarantine facilities, isolation facilities, and we met with the chief of staff. We met with the chief procurement officer. Public health was there. I think it was like 2 days ago that we met, and we laid out the process that this is what we're going to we're going to require in terms of a hotel quarantine facility or a quarantine facility. This is what we're going to require in terms of isolation facility. We got public health buy-in. The chief of staff, acting chief of staff, John Jr. Cava, was leading the meeting. And, GSA was there and they concurred. And, I said during the meeting that, please do not go straight to the GSA and just work everything through our administrative service officer, Marie Kenga, right? Mm-hmm. Because, you don't want anyone to mention any specific product or brand name because, it can potentially muddy the waters. And now we're, once someone contaminates it, right, it's really hard to go back, right? Because you don't want the perception that someone's influencing the procurement process.
And so would the perception be, and it's kind of a stupid question because I read all the emails, but would you say the perception was that the Adelup legal counsel was muddying the process and tainting it?
Well, I wouldn't say that only because, GSA wasn't part of that process, right?
Right. And so is the legal counsel still involved in this redo?
So, the legal counsel will always be there to provide advice and guidance and, if needed. But, no, at this time, the effort's being led by the acting chief of staff.
Man, Charles, how was that? Was it like, did he try and get in the meeting? You're like, no, man, you screwed this all up, dude.
No, nothing like that. Yeah, okay. It was the acting chief of staff that called the meeting.
Okay.
And it was a productive meeting because, we had a couple of courses of action and we said, hey, how about, do we lease the entire facility? Do we lease floor by floor? Can we mix isolation and quarantine facility? Because there's the part of the process where we do need to do what we need to make sure that we procure these capabilities to save lives, right? Or potentially save lives in the future. But there's also the public administration side of things where we have to be, fiscally responsible, right? And I can tell you that that when it comes to, keeping costs down and, Lester Carlson, I swear we talk almost every other day, and he's a hound dog. When it comes, if he sees something like a questionable cost, he will question it, and he's been very good about that.
Okay, so fiscally responsible, yes or no? Pac Star Quarantine Facility, 389 rooms that we're paying for, even if they're vacant. Yes.
I would have done it different. That's all I could say.
Wyndham?
Yes
or no?
Yeah. So, like I said, I would have done all this different.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, what about laundry services and feeding? When you said there were different courses of action, so we're going to go into the possibility of doing these new quarantine isolation facilities.
I don't think feeding would have. If it, like I said, if it went through Lester, I don't think feeding would have been approved.
Okay, right. but going forward though, are we going to be providing feeding
for the staff?
No, we will not be providing feeding.
Sorry, cabinet, no more catering for the cabinet.
Will we have cabinet members manning the quarantine isolation facility, or will we be having maybe like the National Guard?
We will be requesting for the National Guard for the management of these facilities, yes.
Can we just clarify with the National Guard, are they 100% federally funded under this state of emergency or the President's Declaration?
They are. So they're under what's called 502F. And so they actually received an extension to June 24th.
God, how did the people who handled this first round not know all of this stuff? That's insane. You're describing a completely different course of action that just makes so much sense compared to what we just went through. I mean, we're at the tail end, knock on wood, of this pandemic, and now we're going to redo things, and I just don't know, how do you get up at that level
expire
and not know, like, hey, you can call the National Guard, or hey, you're not supposed to feed the cabinet, don't cater the cabinet.
A lot of it goes back to not knowing until we know, right? So if we knew earlier that there were meals being procured, then it probably would have stopped a lot sooner. Maybe I don't know. Right. I mean, I know once we knew, we stopped it only because we can't pay the invoices out.
Right,
no
and
purchase order.
I feel like GovGuam. I mean, what if Ed Byrne was like, no, I don't think I should pay that, and these vendors took the government of Guam to court? Would they even have a validly enforceable contract to take before the judge?
Yeah, and so I mean, I don't know, and maybe the question is a bit rhetorical, but
right, yeah. It was.
Yeah, and so it's so if you look at Claudia Foggia, the chief procurement officer, she's a classified employee, right? And she's I'm a classified employee, and and there are certain positions that are classified for a reason, right? Because you want to make sure that they operate without undue influence or fear of potentially losing their jobs, I guess. And I can tell you that there has been no undue influence on Claudia or myself.
Okay.
To do anything legal.
Right. But had you signed those documents, Charles, that they had sent over to you to sign, in your mind, would it have been illegal, or would it have just been not reimbursable?
Well, I mean, if they try to force us to sign it, then we're going to have some issues. But given how novel this event is, it's really hard to tell, because a lot of the rules are not being I'm talking about on the FEMA reimbursement side. A lot of the rules are kind of, the guidance kind of changing every so often. We get a new COVID-19 update on the public assistance program of what's potentially reimbursable or what's not. Non-congregate shelters, we've never used non-congregate shelters for an emergency or disaster before. We've always had the use of gyms and other open shelters, but because of the need to have people socially distanced and isolated, FEMA went ahead and they approved non-congregate shelters for folks to use, and so that's basically what the quarantine isolation facilities are. They're non-congregate shelters.
Mm-hmm. But they also, in that PA, it does say that you have to have records, show how many people are in the hotel, who got,
Correct.
How many people got fed. It's like at the bottom. I think it's under one of the. No, actually, yeah, it was one of the letters that I saw from Mr. Fenton.
Yes, and it shows, it tells you what's reimbursable, what's not.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so in terms of like leasing an entire facility, you got to think for isolation operations, right? It's kind of hard to lease a couple rooms or lease an entire floor. So, we will probably be asking for some sort of exception to policy or some alternate project to see how we can get the lease for the entire facility reimbursed. So it's not dead in the water.
Okay.
But based off of what's in the current policy, they're only when I say they, talk about FEMA's only reimbursing for residents of Guam who are returning residents of Guam, and they're not reimbursing for federal employees, DoD employees and their dependents, or anyone who's coming to Guam in a non-resident status.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why the initial guidance was that if you're coming to Guam and you're not a resident of Guam, you'll be required to pay, was it like $225 or something like that?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, but there was the guidance in the beginning that was requiring non-residents of Guam to basically pay for their stay, lodging and meals. Mm-hmm. I guess that's a deterrent, right, to prevent visitors from coming to the island.
I don't even recall seeing that. Did anybody pay $225?
I don't know.
Oh,
I don't think so. Charles, what about for example, like the example, Pacific Star, big hotel, a lot of rooms. We're not even using all of them. We're being charged $100 a pop. Moving forward under the real way to do this procurement, how would we acquire the services of a hotel and not have to pay the full clip for 100 empty rooms? Is there a way that you work that should have been done the first time?
Yeah. So in the bid spec that we're working with GSA is we're going to rent by floor, and so we're gonna pay for rooms utilized, and rooms on that floor that are not utilized, we'll probably pay for some sort of small holding fee. But we're not going to pay for unserviceable rooms. We're not going to pay for any rooms that don't meet what's in the scope of work.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if a room has mold, we're asking for a clean room without mold, or if the AC is not working, or anything that we asked line by line, we're not going to pay for the room. And they can. That's just that's part of the process, right? It's whatever's in that purchase order. If you don't follow the scope of work, then we're not paying for it.
Yeah. So I want to ask. We had spoken to countless people who are quarantined at the Pacific Star Hotel. We've seen pictures. I mean, the rooms, the individual air cons, mold, the fixtures falling apart. Had you been involved from the get-go with the Pacific Star, would you have would you have approved something like that?
He didn't.
For them to stay,
them
to stay in those rooms?
Yeah, you saw. I mean, I'm sure you've seen it all over social media. The condition of these rooms. I mean, it's like it's a bad deal.
Well, so I can't speak about the facility or that, but like I said, if there was a scope of work and there was a purchase order that stated that we're only going to pay for rooms that were mold free or clean, then I mean I don't know why we would put those people like that in those types of rooms, but definitely shouldn't pay for it.
Mm-hmm. So how soon are we going to be looking at a new emergency? It's going to be under an emergency purchase to be approved for the upcoming new quarantine isolation facility. And is it going to be one or multiple quarantine isolation facilities?
So it really depends on which hotel's GSA awards. But we gave the bid specs. Public health. We had Shima from public health there give his input. So for example, if we do get one facility, then we have to make sure that isolation is kept in a separate wing, not necessarily separate floors. And so this may be one hotel or facility. This may be multiple. And so it really depends on we have to work with what's available, right? What's available, and then of course what's whoever's awarded.
Okay.
Well, I feel like it's going to be a little awkward for you around the office today.
No, I mean, I'm here to I'm here to support everyone.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we definitely appreciate your candor and your honesty and really the insight that you provide in this, because sometimes it's hard to pierce that veil. You know what I mean, and to get to the real transparency.
I mean, if we have documents and we're FOIA'd, then we're going to submit what we have.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I got to ask though,
Yep.
Based on your experience and emergency and disasters that you've responded to as the Civil Defense Administrator, I want to say, is it close to 10 years? How many years?
No, I've only been here for 5 years. But a lot of when Governor Calvo appointed me, a lot of my so when I was appointed, I was 32 at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I had an extensive military background,
right.
And of course, education-wise, I was a doctoral candidate.
Mm-hmm.
Still am, by the way.
Okay.
Finished one day, but it was a combination of I think experience in education, and
Mm-hmm.
I hope I hope I did right by the last administration, and I hope I've continued to do right with this administration and provide just it's the best advice I can give.
Mm-hmm. Well, like I said, having all this experience, I know we worked storms with you for several years, and when this all came up, and the fact that you did do emergency purchases with the PPEs, when this all came up with the quarantine and isolation facilities, the laundry services contract, the feeding of cabinet members and out-of-loop staffers, were you like, what the hell? Or thinking in your mind, like, what is this? And this is not going to fly?
What manner of trickery is this?
Were you shocked? Oh, sorry. Were you shocked?
Well, I wasn't included when I say from the get-go. And from the get-go, I'm talking about a lot of stuff prior to the actual emergency. I just wasn't in the loop.
But shouldn't you be in the loop when you're the civil defense administrator?
I agree, but I just, for whatever reason, I wasn't in the loop. I have a colleague of mine. Her name is Wendy Smith-Reeve, and she was my counterpart over in Arizona. And so she actually resigned in the middle of the emergency. She just felt that, her role as the state EM director wasn't being utilized. They didn't follow processes. And, I'm just fortunate that when the governor actually declared a state of emergency, that we actually implemented the comprehensive emergency management plan. And the cabinet, they've been very good about ensuring that they utilize their response activity coordinators versus director to director type of coordination, because if they utilize their response activity coordinators, which they have been, we have a system of record. We have you can see who's touched it, where the resources are coming from, timelines, and all the processes that go into getting resources.
Mm-hmm.
My role is I'm a coordinator, right? So if they ask for something from us, then we're going to do our best to get it.
Well, it's reassuring to see her in the loop now. So
yeah, and this is the first time we've had major disaster or emergency like this, right? So it's.
Charles, I feel like they're a bunch of newbies, and I would have been like, hey, who knows how to do this? Can you help me out here? Because you guys they just got in office. Legal counsel is so green. A lot of green people there. So I don't know why they didn't say, hey, give me a hand here.
Yeah, and so I've given inputs on several different issues, and I've given input on what's potentially reimbursable and what's not. Specific processes between us and FEMA. So it's just for some reason it's been hit or miss.
Mm-hmm. By the way, who's staying at Perlis Court?
Yeah, what do you know about that? 17 fully furnished condominiums. I don't know. We heard it was. Go ahead.
Perlis Court was not coordinated by us. So that was for medical staff. For I believe I want to say GMH medical staff who were when they had the COVID-19. I remember when they had the positive person over in GMH.
Right.
So med staff were staying there to prevent decontamination.
I want to believe that, but I kind of can't help but think, are you sure like Tony Babalta wasn't crashing there or something? Or was that like the love pad or, you know what I mean? Because it's 17 fully furnished condos. Come on.
Well, for that, I asked a couple of days ago just for the list of people staying there. So so there is a list of people who have been staying there.
Can you provide that to us?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
No problem. It's med staff, right?
Okay.
It's the medical staff. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and so they were staying between Perlis Court and the Wyndham. But in talking about procurement, medical staff lodging is something that we are working with GSA to procure, and they will more than likely probably stay in with the quarantine folks in the facility, mm-hmm. or isolation folks.
It just seems kind of random, this whole Perlis Court thing. I don't know how because they're not a GHR member, so again, I don't know how they got folded into the conversation. But are you guys so that's gonna get scrapped, basically, is what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay.
I think all of the Pac Star, Wyndham Days, and Perlis Court
are out of here
because they're starting from scratch.
Man, the cabinet's going to look back at this time, man. They're going to be like, man, in that COVID, remember that? We're getting that COVID pay. We're, working in the hotel. We're getting the meals. Man.
Stop.
Sorry. That was rhetorical, Charles.
Got it.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, appreciate it.
When's your next meeting? Are you guys is this pretty much done, this plan, this course of actions that you guys have listed that I'm looking at?
Yeah, so we met 2 days ago, and then that list of future actions that we're going to take, that's from a meeting with GSA.
Right. I saw that there was something in there about stop the bleeding.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were gonna get that.
No, that's just a nickname I gave to current items. So
yeah. Charles, what about the federal authorities? I mean, there's been rumors going around when they see stuff like this. Is this something that they, maybe go pay you a visit or anything? Have we got any info on that?
you're talking about which federal authorities, like FEMA or?
I mean, any FEMA, the other
big federal
the big
authority.
ones, all the federal authorities that start with an F. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, no.
Might end with
no,
the I.
No, so no one's paid us a visit. And FEMA, they are here to support, and so they never get involved with local matters, local politics, local operations.
Right.
They just want to make sure that everything they do to support us is, follows a federal process.
Right. Well, we're gonna let you go. I know you got some stuff to do. I'm pretty sure you're going to be feeling some eyes burning in the back of your head, but hey, it's good to talk to you. It's good to shed some light on this.
Sure, not a problem. Anytime.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Charles.
I appreciate it.
Of course.
Take care.
Hagamos, wash your hands.
Thanks.
Okay.
Bye.
9:37. Oh my goodness! Did you guys hear that? That's pretty huge. I think it's pretty huge. Thank you to Charles Esteves for shedding this light on now. I mean, the takeaway is that we are redoing everything.
Starting new.
And the correct way. That is a huge malfunction, if I could use that word.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
yeah. I mean, if you see the contracts, they are on the governor's website. It tells you, what these hotels are supposed to provide, what the governor's, the government. Well, they didn't even sign it. So Charles Esteves' signature is required. The AG signature was required. BBMR signature was required, and one of them, public health signature, was required. Who else? Oh, and the governor's signature. But it wasn't signed. These contracts that are posted on the website. But what was attached was the memo dated May 8th, signed by the governor, that explaining that she has these special powers under Title 10.
the Health Powers Emergency Act. Okay. So, what I thought was really key there, Bree, was when we asked him if you had signed those documents, would you have been doing something illegal? And he was basically like, I didn't sign them, and if they had forced me to sign them, then yeah. Pretty crazy. 9:39. We're going to take a little break. I just need to do some deep breathing after that interview.